On a peaceful Saturday morning in Willow Park, two little sisters were chasing butterflies until they saw a man lying motionless under an oak tree. "Mister, wake up!" they cried, not knowing that the man they were trying to save wasn't just anyone. He was a millionaire CEO named Richard Blake. What happens next will melt your heart. From fear to friendship, from loneliness to love, this is the story of how two innocent little girls changed a rich man's life forever and reminded America that real kindness doesn't come from money, it comes from the heart. The morning began like a picture from a storybook. Soft rays of golden sunlight filtered through the tall willow trees, painting everything in shades of warmth and peace. Birds chirped high above, fluttering between branches as if they were singing a gentle song of joy. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers, sweet and comforting, like the kind of morning that promised nothing but happiness. In the middle of Willow Park, laughter sparkled like music. Two little sisters, Bailey and Ruby, ran barefoot across the soft green field, their giggles rising like bells in the wind. Bailey, the younger one, wore a pink dress that fluttered as she spun in circles, chasing a butterfly that refused to be caught. Ruby, a year older, followed behind, holding a net made from an old cereal box and two sticks. "I almost got it," she laughed. They didn't care about the world around them, just the joy of the moment. Their mother always said the park was magical, and that morning it truly was. Everything shimmered in light. The leaves danced, and time itself seemed to pause for the beauty of their innocence. But then, in an instant, that peace shattered. Ruby froze mid-laughter. Her eyes, once full of joy, widened in alarm. Her small hand clutched Bailey's arm tightly. "Bailey, look," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Bailey turned. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Under the shadow of the great oak tree, the one they always played near, lay a man. He wasn't moving, not even a little. He looked too well dressed to belong there. A crisp white shirt, black slacks, and polished shoes that gleamed even in the dirt. A silver watch glimmered on his wrist, but his face was pale, almost colorless. It looked wrong, too quiet, too still. "Mister?" Ruby called softly. Her voice barely rose above the rustling of the leaves. There was no answer, not even a breath of movement. Bailey's heart began to race. She wasn't used to seeing grown-ups like that, silent, lifeless, and cold. She felt a strange ache in her chest, something that made her tiny body tremble. She dropped her butterfly net without realizing it and took a hesitant step forward. "Bailey, don't," Ruby whispered, afraid. But Bailey couldn't stop. Something inside her, maybe courage, maybe kindness, pulled her closer. The man looked so lonely, like he had been lying there for hours, forgotten by the world. Bailey knelt beside him, her knees brushing the cool grass. She reached out with shaking fingers and touched his arm. It was warm, but too still. "Mister, wake up," she whispered. "Please wake up." No response. Her voice broke. "Please, mister, you can't sleep here." Tears began to form in her eyes. She didn't know why she was crying, only that something about him made her heart ache. Ruby, though scared, joined her sister. The two little girls sat beside the stranger, their small shadows falling across his still face. "Maybe he's sick," Ruby said softly. "We should get help." Bailey nodded but didn't move. For some reason, she couldn't leave him there, not like this. She looked at his face again, noticing how tired he seemed, even in sleep. There were faint lines near his eyes, not from age but from pain. The kind that doesn't come from sickness, but from living too hard for too long. The world around them seemed to grow quieter, as if the park itself was holding its breath. The butterflies that danced moments ago now hovered in the distance, and the gentle song of the birds faded into silence. Bailey pressed her small hand to the man's shoulder again. "Mister, please wake up," she begged, her voice breaking through the stillness. "You can't stay like this." And then for a fleeting second she thought she saw him twitch. Her heart leapt. "Ruby, he moved." Ruby gasped, her eyes lighting with hope. But then, just as quickly, the movement stopped. The man lay still again, silent, pale, and unreachable. The two little girls exchanged a frightened glance. The wind picked up, stirring the grass around them, whispering softly through the trees as if the whole world was waiting to see whether the stranger would open his eyes. Bailey swallowed hard, her voice trembling one last time. Mister, she whispered again, leaning closer, her golden curls brushing his arm. Don't go away. Please wake up. And in that fragile, tearful plea, under the bright morning sun, the story of their lives quietly began. The world seemed to stop for those two tiny hearts. Bailey and Ruby stood frozen beside the stranger, their breaths quick, their little hands clutching each other for courage. The park, once full of laughter and sunshine, suddenly felt too quiet, too big, and far too still. A bird chirped overhead, then flew away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and strange. Bailey's throat tightened. Her voice came out as a whisper. Ruby, what do we do now? Ruby looked around desperately. Their babysitter was nowhere in sight. She had gone to buy snacks, and now it felt like forever since she left. The girls could hear the distant laughter of children playing somewhere else, but it sounded like it came from another world. Bailey's small mind raced. She thought of what her mother once said when she saw a man faint at the grocery store. If someone faints, talk to them. Don't let them sleep. Let them know they're not alone. That memory lit a spark of courage in her little heart. She took a deep breath, wiped the tears from her eyes, and turned back to the man. He still wasn't moving. His chest rose and fell slowly, but his face was pale and tight with pain. Bailey reached out her trembling hand and touched his arm again. Mister, she whispered softly, please wake up. You can't sleep here. You'll get sick. Her tiny fingers patted his sleeve, her touch full of innocence and care. A kind of care that had no fear or judgment, only kindness. Ruby stood close behind her, biting her lip, eyes wide with worry. Try again, Ruby whispered. Bailey nodded. Mister, please, wake up. It's too cold on the grass. Then a sound, a faint groan. Both girls gasped, their eyes filling with hope. The man's eyelids fluttered slightly, then slowly opened. His eyes, deep, tired blue, met the two faces leaning over him, faces so full of concern that his heart, weak as it was, gave a small stir of life. He blinked, confused. His voice came out as a broken whisper. Where am I? Ruby let out a small cry of relief. You're in the park, mister. You were sleeping. We thought you were gone. Gone? He repeated softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, though pain flickered behind his eyes. He tried to sit up, but as soon as he lifted his head, a sharp wave of dizziness hit him like thunder. He groaned and clutched his forehead. Don't move too fast, Bailey cried, her little hands pressing against his arm. Her palms were warm and small, and somehow they felt like safety. You hit your head on the bench, I think, she said, her voice shaking but determined. The man looked down at her, seeing how her tiny hands tried to help him, how she looked at him with such real worry. Not because of who he was, but simply because she cared. It was something he hadn't felt in years. He swallowed hard. You helped me? Bailey and Ruby nodded eagerly, both smiling now, relieved that he could talk. Ruby said proudly, Bailey remembered what her mom said. She made you wake up. The man's lips curved slightly, a weak but genuine smile. He looked between them, his gaze softening. You're very brave, he whispered. Both of you. Bailey's cheeks flushed pink. We just didn't want you to be alone, she said shyly. Something inside him twisted, something deep, almost forgotten. No one had said that to him in years. Not in board meetings, not at luxury dinners, not even among the people who pretended to care. He'd lived surrounded by people but had never felt seen, not until now. And it took two little girls, with messy hair and butterfly nets, to remind him that strangers could still care for a man who seemed untouchable. The man, whose name was Richard Blake, tried to steady himself. The sunlight glimmered across his watch, and for a brief second, Bailey thought he looked like a prince from a fairy tale. Except he was hurt and lost and sad. You should rest, Ruby said softly, sounding older than her age. We can wait with you. Richard blinked at her kindness. You'd do that? He asked quietly. Bailey nodded with all the certainty of a child's heart. Of course. You woke up because we stayed. We can't leave now. That simple sentence pierced through him like sunlight cutting through clouds. His world, once made of numbers, meetings, and luxury, suddenly felt smaller than the tiny hands holding his sleeve. The sound of life began to return to the park, laughter in the distance, leaves rustling, the whisper of the breeze. But for Richard, the only thing that existed were those two little faces. He took a slow, careful breath, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Warmth. It wasn't just relief, it was connection. He didn't know who they were or why they cared. But one thing was certain. In that quiet park, under the gentle hands of two little girls, the man who had everything finally began to feel human again. And though he didn't know it yet, that small act of kindness would soon change his entire world forever. His name was Richard Blake, and in the world's eyes, he had it all. At only 33, he was one of the youngest real estate CEOs in the country, a man whose name appeared on buildings that scraped the sky, whose signature could change the fate of entire companies. He had money that never ended, cars that cost more than most people's homes, and a mansion on a hill that shone like glass in the morning sun. But behind all that brilliance, behind every polished shoe and expensive suit, hid a truth no one ever saw. A man tired of pretending to be strong. Every morning, Richard would wake up in a bed that was too big and too empty. He'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how success could make him feel so small inside. The phone would buzz beside him, meetings, reports, deadlines, people who wanted his signature, not his soul. And though his life looked perfect on the outside, his heart felt colder with each passing day. He had forgotten what laughter sounded like, real laughter, not the kind people forced in his presence. He couldn't remember the last time someone asked him if he was okay. Even his assistant, the only person who saw him daily, spoke to him through numbers and schedules, not care or concern. He lived in a world that worshipped his name, but no one truly knew the man behind it. That morning, he'd sat in his glass office overlooking the city. Across the table, board members argued about profit margins while investors discussed expansion plans in voices that dripped with greed. The sound of it made his chest tighten. He leaned back, his head throbbing. His vision blurred slightly from the lack of sleep. 2 nights of work, no rest, no peace. The air felt heavy, the voices too loud, the room too cold. One man, his senior advisor, slammed a file on the table and said, "Sir, we can't afford to hesitate. The deal must go through today." Something in Richard snapped quietly. He stood up, his voice calm but empty. "Gentlemen, continue without me." They looked at him, surprised. No one dared question him, not the man who built an empire from nothing. He walked out of the meeting, loosened his tie, and stepped into the open air. The wind hit his face, warm and real, the first thing that felt human all day. He didn't know where he was going. He just kept walking, one step after another, down streets filled with people who didn't recognize him. As he passed a bakery, the smell of fresh bread reminded him of mornings long ago, when his mother used to bake before she passed away. That memory struck him deep. It had been so long since anyone had cared for him without wanting something in return. The world blurred as he reached Willow Park, a place he hadn't visited since his childhood. He remembered playing there once, before money, before fame, before loneliness became his shadow. He sat down on a bench under a tree, the same tree that would later hold his unconscious body. He ran a hand through his hair and stared at the families laughing nearby. A father pushed his daughter on a swing. A mother helped her toddler feed the ducks. Every smile he saw felt like a wound, a reminder of everything he'd lost to ambition. His chest ached, not from illness but from emptiness. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, or so he thought. But the exhaustion that had been building for days finally took hold. His vision dimmed. His body gave up. He fell to the ground near the bench, unseen by most, just another man lost in the crowd. For minutes that stretched like hours, the park moved on, unaware that one of the city's richest men lay unconscious beneath the sunlight. And perhaps that was poetic, the man who owned everything, lying helpless in the place where nothing could be bought. But fate, kind and quiet, sent help not from luxury or power, but from innocence. 2 little girls, barefoot and full of life, saw what no one else did. They saw him, not the millionaire, not the CEO, but the man who had fallen and needed help. And when their tiny voices broke the silence, "Mister, wake up!" Something deep within him stirred. Those 3 words cut through the fog of his unconsciousness like a ray of light through darkness. He didn't know it then, but those voices were about to rewrite everything he believed about life, love, and what it truly meant to be rich. For in that single moment, lying under the open sky, Richard Blake, the man without a smile, began to remember how to live again. The sunlight had grown warmer now, painting golden patches across the green field of Willow Park. Richard sat quietly beneath the great oak tree, his back resting against its sturdy trunk. His head still throbbed faintly, but the pain didn't bother him anymore. Something else was stirring inside, something softer, something healing. Bailey sat cross-legged beside him, watching him carefully as if afraid he might faint again. Ruby stood a few steps away, hands on her hips like a tiny guardian. "You scared us," she said firmly. "You shouldn't sleep on the ground like that." Richard smiled faintly, the corner of his lips curving up in the smallest, most uncertain grin. "You're right, Doctor," he said with mock seriousness. "I'll try not to do that again." Just then, the girl's babysitter, Martha, came rushing down the path with a paper bag of snacks. Her face turned pale when she saw the scene. Two little girls sitting beside a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. "Bailey! Ruby!" she cried, breathless. "What happened? Who is this?" Bailey jumped up. "It's okay, Martha. He was sleeping, but we helped him wake up." Richard raised his hands calmly. "I'm all right," he said gently. "They found me when I fainted. I owe them my thanks, and maybe an apology for scaring them." Martha looked at him, still uncertain, then noticed the kindness in his eyes. His voice was low, smooth, but full of sincerity. He didn't look like a threat, more like a man who just found something he didn't know he was missing. Ruby tugged on Richard's sleeve and said proudly, "He called us heroes." Richard chuckled softly. "And I meant it." He turned to Martha. "You know, heroes usually wear capes. But today," he paused, glancing at the two little girls with their messy hair and bright shoes, "they wear pink sneakers and hold butterfly nets." Bailey giggled so hard she almost dropped her toy net. "See, Ruby? We are heroes." Richard's heart felt lighter hearing their laughter. It was such an innocent sound, the kind of joy he had forgotten existed in the world. Martha sighed in relief. "Well, if you're all right, mister, I suppose we'll be going now." But before she could finish, Bailey tugged on her hand. "Wait, can we share our ice cream with him?" Richard blinked, surprised. "Ice cream?" Ruby nodded eagerly. "It'll make you feel better. Ice cream fixes everything." He hesitated. No one had ever offered him something so simple. Not because of who he was, but just because they wanted to. It felt strange and beautiful. "I'd love that," he said softly. Moments later, the three of them sat on the grass, passing around melting vanilla cones that left sticky trails on their fingers. Bailey licked hers quickly before it dripped on her dress, while Ruby drew little shapes in the dirt with her spoon. "So," Bailey asked, "why were you sleeping here, mister?" Richard smiled faintly. "I think I just got too tired," he said honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups forget to rest." Ruby frowned in confusion. "But don't grown-ups have beds?" He laughed, a real laugh, deep and genuine, the kind that shook the quiet sadness from his chest. "Yes, we do. But sometimes, even a soft bed can feel cold when you're lonely." Bailey tilted her head. "You're lonely?" Richard hesitated, his eyes softening. He looked at the girls, two little souls who had shown him more warmth in 1 hour than anyone had in years. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Not since you woke me up." Ruby grinned proudly. "Then you can sit with us whenever you feel lonely." He looked at her, stunned by the purity of her offer. "I might just take you up on that," he said with a smile. The ice cream cones melted faster than they could eat them. Bailey smeared some across her cheek, and Ruby burst out laughing. Even Richard joined in, laughing until his eyes watered. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he wasn't Richard Blake, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He was just a man sitting in a park, surrounded by sunshine, grass, and two giggling girls who had unknowingly mended something broken inside him. He told them about the pigeons that always stole his lunch as a kid, and Ruby told him about her imaginary unicorn named Sparklefoot. They talked and laughed until the shadows began to stretch across the field, and time seemed to stand still. Every second with them felt different. Pure, honest, real. He realized something then. No meeting, no deal, no expensive dinner had ever given him what these two little girls had given him that day. Peace. When it was finally time for them to leave, Ruby waved her tiny hand. "Don't forget to eat your ice cream next time you're sad." "I won't," Richard promised, smiling wider than he had in years. As they walked away, he sat there watching them. Two little girls skipping hand in hand, butterfly nets swinging at their sides. And for the first time in a long, long while, the man who had everything felt something priceless: happiness. That evening, Richard's car rolled silently through the long driveway, leading to his glass mansion on the hill, a place so beautiful it could have been a palace, yet it felt colder than any winter night. The sun had already dipped behind the horizon, leaving streaks of gold fading into deep blue across the sky. As the automatic doors opened, a soft chime echoed through the vast hallway. The marble floors gleamed under dim lights, and the scent of expensive candles filled the air. Everything was perfect, polished, flawless, lifeless. He loosened his tie, walked through the massive living room, and stopped in front of the grand piano that no one ever played. Dust had begun to gather on its lid. The mansion, though filled with art and gold, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something it could never have. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at the long dining table meant for 12 people. 12 chairs, one man, one echo, no voices, no laughter. The silence pressed against his ears until it almost hurt. He could hear only the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, the same clock that had measured every lonely hour of his success. Richard leaned back, staring at the chandelier above him. It sparkled with diamonds, yet none of it felt alive. The memory of Bailey and Ruby's giggles suddenly filled his mind, cutting through the stillness like sunlight through fog. He could almost hear Ruby's voice. "Mister, you can't sleep here. You'll get sick." A soft smile touched his lips. That tiny voice had saved him more than she knew. He thought about their little shoes covered in dust, their hands sticky from melted ice cream, their innocent eyes that didn't see a millionaire, just a man who needed help. They didn't want anything from him. They didn't even know who he was. That truth hit him like a storm. In his world, people smiled for favors. They cared for his wealth, not his well-being. But those two little girls, they saw him as a person, not a paycheck. He walked to the balcony overlooking the city lights below. The skyline stretched endlessly, dotted with buildings he owned, yet none of them could light up the emptiness in his heart. He whispered to the night, "All this, and I still have nothing real." His phone buzzed with business messages, but he turned it off for the first time in years. He didn't want deals. He didn't want numbers. He wanted that laughter again, the kind that made him forget he was lonely. In that moment, he realized how much he missed connection. Real, human warmth. The kind you can't buy, can't schedule, can't control. He sat down on the couch, his heart heavy, yet strangely alive. For years he had thought peace came from wealth, but now he knew peace had golden curls and blue eyes and asked simple questions like, "Why are you sad, mister?" A single tear slid down his cheek, surprising him. He hadn't cried since his parents passed away years ago. He whispered again, softer this time, "Maybe I was asleep long before they woke me up." The mansion stood still, listening, a silent witness to a man finally realizing that even the richest house means nothing when no one's there to share the laughter inside it. And that night, for the first time in forever, Richard Blake didn't feel proud of his success. He felt human. The following Saturday morning arrived with soft sunshine and the scent of blooming roses drifting across Willow Park. Children ran barefoot in the grass, parents chatted on benches, and somewhere near the big oak tree, laughter danced in the air again, the kind that could melt even the coldest heart. Richard Blake stood at the edge of the park, his hands tucked in his jean pockets, feeling strangely nervous. He wasn't wearing his usual designer suit today. No shiny cufflinks, no expensive watch. Just a simple white t-shirt, worn jeans, and a heart that felt lighter. For years, he had walked into boardrooms like a king. But today, he was just a man hoping to see two little girls who had changed his world. In one hand, he held two small gift boxes wrapped neatly with pink ribbons. His fingers trembled slightly as he looked around the park, half worried they might not come that day. But then, a familiar sound reached him. "Bailey! Ruby!" a woman's voice called. And there they were, two tiny figures in matching summer dresses, chasing each other with paper nets once again. Their golden curls glistened in the sunlight. For a moment, Richard simply watched them. A smile tugged at his lips. Not the polite one he wore for cameras or clients, but a real one, the kind that comes from the heart. Ruby spotted him first. Her blue eyes widened. Then she squealed, "Bailey!" Look who's back! They ran toward him, their little shoes kicking up dust. Ruby reached him first and threw her small arms around his leg. Mister, you didn't fall asleep this time. Richard laughed, kneeling down so he was at their level. No, I didn't. I made sure to have breakfast first, he said playfully. Bailey tilted her head, her curls bouncing. You look different today. You're not shiny anymore. He chuckled. Good, I didn't want to be shiny today. I just wanted to be your friend. The girls giggled, clapping their hands. Then he reached into his pocket and held out the 2 small boxes. I owe my little doctors a thank you gift, he said with a warm smile. Ruby's eyes sparkled. For us? Of course, Richard replied. You saved me. That makes you heroes. They took the boxes carefully as if holding something precious. Bailey opened hers first and gasped. Inside was a delicate silver butterfly necklace, its wings shimmering softly in the sun. It sparkles, Bailey whispered in awe. Ruby opened hers too, her mouth forming a perfect O. It's the prettiest thing I've ever seen. Richard's smile deepened. They're special, he said softly. Whenever you wear them, remember this. Kindness makes the world shine brighter, just like you two did for me. Bailey looked up, her eyes wide. You talk like my teacher, she said. He laughed gently. Maybe your teacher is very wise. Ruby suddenly hugged him, a tight, unexpected embrace from a little heart that didn't care about status or money, just warmth. You're our friend forever now, she declared proudly. Bailey joined in, wrapping her small arms around him too. Their laughter filled the air, soft and sweet, wrapping around Richard like sunlight. For a man who once lived surrounded by glass walls and cold marble floors, this moment felt like a miracle. He blinked, trying to keep the tears from falling. You girls have no idea how much this means to me, he whispered. Ruby smiled, confused but happy. You're funny, mister. You talk like you're gonna cry. Maybe I am, Richard admitted softly. For a few minutes they sat under the oak tree, the same one where his life had quietly changed forever. He listened to them talk about school, about their dog named Pickles, about how they wanted to catch real butterflies someday. Every word melted something inside him, the hardness, the emptiness, the loneliness that had ruled his heart for years. As the sun warmed their faces, Richard thought, This is what happiness feels like. He didn't need a company logo to define him anymore. He didn't need applause or wealth to feel alive. All he needed was this, 2 innocent souls, and a reminder that life's greatest treasures often come wrapped in small, unexpected moments. And when the girls finally ran off to chase butterflies again, Richard stayed under that tree for a long time, smiling, his heart full, the echo of their laughter still dancing in his soul. A week later, on a quiet Thursday morning, the mailbox outside the little corner bookstore creaked open. Bailey and Ruby's mother, Grace, stood there holding a steaming cup of coffee, still wearing her apron from the shop. The day had just begun, and she was already tired. The kind of tired that comes from fighting too hard to keep a dream alive. Her bookstore, Willow Tales, had been the heart of their small town for years. But lately, bills piled up faster than she could pay them. Business had slowed, rent had gone up, and every night she sat by the counter wondering how much longer she could hold on. As she sorted through the usual pile of envelopes, advertisements, bills, and more bills, one letter caught her eye. It was simple, white, and had no return address. Her brows furrowed. Strange, she murmured, tearing it open carefully. Inside was a folded note, written in neat, elegant handwriting. The first line made her heart skip. To the family whose kindness shines brighter than gold. Grace's eyes moved down the page, reading each word slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Sometimes the smallest hearts remind us what it means to be human again. This world needs more souls like yours, kind, gentle, and full of light. Please accept this as a small thank you from someone deeply grateful. Underneath the note was a bank receipt. Her breath caught in her throat. The amount was enough to pay off every debt, restock her shelves, and keep Willow Tales open for years to come. Grace gasped, her knees weakening. She sat down on the porch steps, eyes filling with tears. Oh my God, who could have done this? She ran inside, calling out, Bailey! Ruby! Girls, come here, quick! The 2 sisters came running, still in their pajamas. their butterfly necklaces glinting under the morning light. "What happened, Mommy?" Bailey asked, clutching her stuffed bear. Grace held up the note, her voice trembling with emotion. "Someone sent us a letter. They saved our store. Can you believe it?" Ruby's little face lit up, but she didn't look surprised. Instead, she exchanged a quiet glance with Bailey. The same secret spark danced in their blue eyes. Bailey whispered softly, "Mommy, maybe it's a secret friend." Grace smiled through tears. "A secret friend? Oh, sweetheart, I wish I knew who." Ruby looked down, her fingers playing with her silver butterfly necklace. "Maybe he doesn't want you to know," she said in a small, proud voice. Grace tilted her head. "And how would you know that, young lady?" Ruby bit her lip, then looked up with a tiny grin. "Because secret friends never tell. They just help when people need it most." Bailey nodded in agreement, her curls bouncing. "He's the mister from the park, Mommy, the one we woke up." Grace blinked in surprise. "What? That man? The one you told me about?" Ruby giggled and nodded. "He said kindness makes the world shine. Maybe he wanted to help us shine too." For a moment, Grace just stared at her daughters. Their innocence, their certainty, their quiet pride. A warm tear slipped down her cheek. She knelt down and pulled them both into her arms. "My brave little girls," she whispered, voice breaking. "You brought an angel into our lives." Bailey smiled softly. "Not an angel, Mommy. Just a nice mister who needed a nap." Grace laughed through her tears, holding them tighter. Across town, Richard Blake sat in his office, looking out at the same skyline he used to stare at in emptiness. But today, the city looked different. It felt alive. He had sent the donation anonymously, just as he promised the girls. He didn't want recognition or thanks, only to give back a little of the warmth that had been given to him. As he sipped his coffee, he smiled at the thought of those two little girls keeping his secret. Somewhere out there, he imagined them whispering, "He's our secret friend." And that thought alone was worth more to him than all the money he had ever earned. For the first time in years, Richard didn't feel like the richest man in the city. He felt like the luckiest. Months drifted by like pages in a soft storybook. The coldness of winter never touched Willow Park that year. Not because of the weather, but because of the warmth that bloomed there every weekend. Under the same old oak tree, laughter always echoed. Light, pure, and full of life. Richard Blake, once the untouchable millionaire CEO, now came to the park not as a man of power, but as Mr. Richard, the friend who always brought sandwiches, juice boxes, and storybooks filled with fairy tales about kindness, hope, and friendship. Every weekend, he sat cross-legged on the grass while Bailey and Ruby climbed trees, chased butterflies, or tried to teach him how to braid flowers into crowns. Sometimes he failed miserably, which made the girls laugh so hard that even passing strangers couldn't help but smile. He had never known such joy before, the kind that didn't come from success or applause, but from being seen and loved for who he really was. The girl's mother, Grace, would often wave at him from the bookstore across the street. She didn't know he was the mysterious donor who had saved her shop, but she felt gratitude every time she saw how her daughters lit up around him. To the rest of the world, Richard Blake was still a powerful name, but here in Willow Park, he was just Mr. Richard, the man who read stories under a tree and taught two little girls how to dream big. One golden evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the park in shades of orange and pink, the three of them sat quietly together. The wind rustled the leaves above, and the girls leaned against him, tired from an afternoon of laughter and running. Bailey, with her curious eyes, looked up suddenly. "Mr. Richard," she asked softly, "why do you always smile when we're here?" Richard blinked, taken aback by the innocence in her voice. He gazed at the two small faces looking up at him, faces that had unknowingly changed the course of his life. He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep inside, the kind that carries both love and gratitude. "Because," he said gently, his voice low and warm, "you two reminded me that life isn't about money or things. It's about moments, little moments that make your heart full." Ruby tilted her head. "Like ice cream?" she asked with a grin. He chuckled. "Exactly like ice cream." Bailey giggled, covering her mouth. "Then your heart must be really full." Richard laughed softly. and for the first time, there was no ache behind it. Just peace. Real peace. He stood up and brushed off the grass from his jeans. Come on, little butterflies. Time to go home before the stars beat us to it. The girls gathered their toys and ran ahead, their laughter trailing behind them like music. Richard watched them, his eyes glistening in the fading light. In that golden hour, he realized something he wished every person could understand. That the richest people are not the ones with the biggest homes or bank accounts, but the ones whose hearts have learned to love and be loved back. As he walked slowly behind them, his gaze lifted to the sky. A sky painted in soft pinks and purples, wide and forgiving. He whispered to himself, "They saved me. Two little angels who didn't even know what saving meant." And maybe that was the lesson America needed most, that true wealth isn't in power or success, but in compassion, in the small hands that reach out to help, in the laughter that heals without asking for anything in return. That night, Willow Park glowed softly under the stars. The oak tree stood tall, guarding the memories of a man who once had everything but felt nothing, until two little girls taught him how to feel again. And from that day on, no matter how high Richard's world rose, he never forgot the place where his heart first learned to smile again, under an old oak tree, beside two little girls named Bailey and Ruby, who showed America what true kindness looks like. That day, the richest man in town realized something powerful. True wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's found in kindness, innocence, and love that asks for nothing in return. In a world where success often replaces compassion, two little girls reminded a man, and all of us, that kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. No matter how rich or powerful you are, humanity is the greatest treasure of all.